Welcome to the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. Each week, Matt, Kurt, Jerry, and the occasional special guest explore how the trauma-informed paradigm challenges traditional beliefs and approaches concerning a wide variety of areas. This podcast addresses psychological trauma in an educational manner and is not designed to replace mental health treatment. If anything in this podcast makes you feel uncomfortable or anxious, please talk to a mental health professional.
Welcome, friends, to episode 95 of the Trauma Informed Lens podcast. I'm Matt. I'm back here today with Jerry to wrap up our Big Idea Summer Series. So we started this back in early June, and here we are in the dog days of summer talking about the meaning of life. So if you're just joining us for the first time, we've been using John Haidt's happiness hypothesis as our guide. If you haven't been reading along with us, don't worry, we're going to catch you up with that piece. So as always, we start out with our bright, shiny objects of the week. And Jerry, I'll let you go first this time. What are you thinking about this week?
Well, you know, what I'm thinking about is for the first time in 28 years, my wife's not going back to school, right? She's retired. But I want to give a shout out to all the teachers, because when kids show up the first day, there's a lot of work and preparation that went into making that first day special.
Yes.
And oftentimes that goes unrecognized. So I want to really recognize the work that teachers do to make. It's not just about going out and getting a new outfit for the first day of school. It's a lot of work to prepare and getting ready, and anxiety, and about, in some ways, kind of grieving the end of summer. But they tend to do it and pull it off. And I want to kind of recognize that work that goes into at least giving children a chance to be successful in school.
Absolutely. And as my wife does go back to school, I'll just second that. Yeah, it's funny. She spent the weekend. I'm not going to say we spent the weekend because I was just watching documentaries on the couch. But, little things that people don't think about is like when you say your kid goes by a nickname and then your kid doesn't go by a nickname, and then you have to relabel everything you spent hours printing out. So it's all those. I don't think anybody who's not a teacher or not married or in a relationship with a teacher has no idea how intensive this time of year gets. So I will follow that up with a shout out as well. So to all the teachers out there, we're with you. So yes. So it's our last chapter, Jerry. We've come a long way with this book. And he ends with another big idea of the meaning of life. And he sort of starts out, and I kind of like his simple equation here for this very complex topic. And maybe we can think about us first and then move into the trauma-informed lens piece of this. But one of the things that he puts out is a very simple way to look at this is sort of your happiness around your meaning, your purpose is a combination of what he says, love and work. And I don't think love necessarily means a romantic relationship per se, though oftentimes it obviously does. I think it's relationships and activities more in generally. But for a very complex topic, he kind of at least starts the chapter out pretty simple. And I just kind of want you to think from your own life, Jerry. I'm sure there might be some things that fall outside these two categories, but how's love and work helped guide you in your life and contributed to your happiness?
Good question. So for me, as I reflected on this, I thought about the 40 past years I've been working with children, families, and adolescents, and really thought about it in terms of the difference between having a goal And a goal would mean, for example, I want to see this many kids, or I want to make this much money, or I want to get these kind of outcomes. And having a passion and a dream. And my passion and dream was always to create a system that not only manages kids' behavior, but really helps them to thrive.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say that, I say it in a way that I didn't really know how I was going to get there, right? I didn't know. I knew that I was going on this journey and I knew that what was currently happening with children and families was not the right way to do it in my mind, but I didn't really know what the right way was and right? And so I became open to this experience, which means I was open to people coming into my lives that had information and knowledge. I was open to the things that the children and the families were teaching me. I was open to the incredible relationships I had with other coworkers and professionals along the way. And I think because I was on this journey, it didn't feel like work. It felt like I was actualizing something, for lack of a better word. And so for me going to work, there was never like, oh my God, I got to go to work and how much time or how much. It was more like, what's going to manifest in my life today?
Yeah.
Kind of thinking about that, right? And so, I think I did a lot of things to position myself, but I can really say, looking back on it, I don't know how things happened. They just happened. But I've always had this intention of wanting to create a healing, reparative experience for people who have been hurt.
Yeah.
And that took on different forms. So, I kind of resonated with his thought of love and work as I began to think back on my own career.
Yeah. Well, I had a kind of similar journey in some ways, though I appreciate maturity over time and being able to now look back at in my mid 40s and what that journey has been. But I really, one of the things, I don't know, maybe it was my own coming out of my own traumatic experiences. I'm not sure exactly where I got this, but somewhere in I would say 16 years old, somewhere around that time, I got the idea in my head that I have one very short life to live. And I probably got that information way too early developmentally to do much with it. But, I really, that has guided me when I think about love and work. It goes like this, the life I wanted to create for myself. And I made some major mistakes along the way, obviously, but I just think, with being fortunate enough to have kind of lucked in and kind of created a life where I get to speak to my passion on a regular basis, and the humility that people will put me on an airplane and fly me places to actually talk about my passion. And, that combined with, wanting to live in a beautiful place, as Colorado is, and having somehow the maturity, while I may not have had the work maturity at around the age of 30, I had at least the insight to say, I need to marry this Sarah girl. It was a big point in my life. So, for me, I think this combination was, okay, I've got such a limited time in this life, and what can I do with that? And I think that for whatever reason, when that thought entered my head at age 16, you could measure it through my GPA jumped very quickly after that, because I realized part of that was probably going to get more education, is that there was just kind of that drive of that. And then I think very quickly, I really fell in love with psychology and the idea that I could I could make a living helping people heal. And I was just like, I think when I was old enough to understand and appreciate that, I think that was another big shift in my life. Is like, how cool is it to wake up every morning and think about how do I help people in my community, and acknowledging I get a lot of selfish return off that as well, which is I think we need to realize that we have incredible privilege to do the work that we do each and every day. The other thing that he says, I think that goes along with it, that I've been trying to really bring into the self-care trainings that I do, and I think it's an interesting question, is this idea of, if you want to put it in 3 boxes, a job, a career, and a calling. Whereas a job is basically a way to get a paycheck. A career is sort of a way to get a paycheck with a plan to get a bigger paycheck, or to sort of move up in some way, shape, or form. And then a calling is being able to go to work each and every day to do something that really connects to your values and your purpose. And one of the things I think, even though, you look at the people who listen to this podcast, we dominate those top categories for burnout. I think one of the things that we do have when we're healthy enough to pay attention to it is that most of us, I believe, are in this work because we were called in some way to enter this profession. And I wonder kind of how that plays into when you talk about your work and kind of, being, that wasn't really, it was more than a job. I think knowing you, I know that this was way more than a job or a career, but it was a calling. I just kind of wonder, what was it about you that called you to really dedicate your life to children and family who are really struggling? You could have picked a lot easier things to do that may have made you more money along the way, but what was that pull for you?
Well, part of it is the role I played in my family, right? It's like that, they're being the family member that had to kind of step up and make people laugh and kind of get people away from stress. I mean, my dad was a World War II disabled vet, had his own PTSD, kind of managed that. So this issue of PTSD became an interest of mine. But, my experience, I was a kind of strange kid, right? So, my parents would tell me that when we would be driving over the Williamsburg Bridge in New York and there was traffic and I was like 4 years old, and I was in the back of a car, by the time the traffic was cleared up and we began to move, everybody on the bridge was yelling, "Bye, Jerry, bye, Jerry." And I had kind of created connections with all these other people on the bridge that I always got energy out of interacting with people, out of doing, right? It didn't take energy away from me. It gave me energy. So, I think my extroverted, my style of doing that kind of drove me to say is, how can I be in a profession where I'm interacting with people, not necessarily in an office, kind of doing calculations and but where I'm really interacting and talking and doing it. The other thing I think happened for me is I grew up during the Vietnam War. Mm-hmm. And, we marched on Washington and we were down. And I got this sense of community as we marched and we were doing it, and the power that people could create in the world, right? Is like, that was an amazing experience to walk down Pennsylvania Avenue towards the Capitol with hundreds of thousands of people shouting and screaming and kind of doing it, and in some ways causing the government to kind of respond. And so I began to think about, how could I make a difference in the lives of people who are unfortunate? and use my voice as I did in Vietnam to kind of create some change.
Yeah.
And the change I was kind of creating wasn't necessarily to get the government to stop doing it. But when I started working, really it was about disciplining kids, right? That somehow, and you know, for whatever reason, discipline never worked with me.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You know, really what worked is people showing up, people caring about me, people engaging me in deep conversations, right? And so I brought that and said how do I get to a spot where someday I could be in charge of creating this place where people come to, in some ways, heal and feel good about themselves. And I didn't know what that looked like. I didn't know what that, matter of fact, when I was getting into graduate school, they said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to create this place. I almost didn't get in because it's like this guy, right? But I want to create this place where people come and heal, but really create really powerful connections with each other.
Yeah.
And it turned out along the way that that's what happened in my life.
Mm-hmm.
So whether it's the power of intention or whether it was, but that from the day I was 4 years old on that bridge I wanted to create connectivity. And I think it helps.
I wonder if you would have, but one of the pieces of my thinking with this, and I think I've had enough conversation and looked at enough research to back it up in a meaningful way, but I really believe, again, for most of us, not everybody, but I'd say the vast majority of people that I meet in the fields of education, social work, psychology, public health, that there's something in their story, like there's something in your story that pulls us to this work. Now, we may not have at the beginning of our academic journey said, hey, I want to work in HIV specifically, or homelessness, or this, that, or the other. But we had a draw to help other people, to create, help other people heal, to live better lives, to be their best. And one of the things I really worry about is with all the burnout that you know, statistics say we struggle with as the helping professionals. I believe one of the first things to go is we lose that connection to purpose. And I really, as I like to say in my training, is I really worry about people who have lost the why am I going to work today. And I just kind of wonder if you had any ways. I mean, knowing you, I almost just think this is for you almost so innate that you might not have to strategically think about it on a regular basis, but maybe through some of the harder parts of your career, when I'm sure you've had ups and downs like everybody else have. How is some of your reconnection, or that connection that, hey, I'm not just like here for a paycheck, but I'm living my life's purpose in the work that I do every day, kind of helped you be more resilient and stay healthier amidst all the stress and trauma inherent to the work that we do?
You know, the first thing that comes to my mind is I was incredibly blessed to, one is I am personally open to continually learning, right? So that's one is I find, you know, things, you know, to learn and grow and have new perspectives as energizing. But I also had incredible people professionally in my life that opened the door to see things in different ways. And again, I think I always had this drive to create this healing, healthy, and somehow that drew people in my life that opened doors to how to do that. But I didn't know how to do that. So it's kind of like when I when I was down in Florida, I ended up being in a place in which, you know, people from the Child Guidance Clinic was in Philadelphia were connected to, and getting to kind of work with people who kind of work with Mnuchin and, you know, and kind of worked with all of the systems people to kind of look at that, right? And it's like, wow, and get behind the mirror and have, people help me. I got to work very early with Steve Langton in Ericksonian hypnosis and take, trainings with him and his wife to kind of looking at that. And so I began to kind of looking at that. I came to Colorado and got involved at the Kemp Center with Dr. Brand Steele and Gail Ryan and Jeff Messner and just incredible people. And then I, got to know Dr. Bruce Perry, and kind of look. So like all of these people, really, when, you have to put like at the end, you have to like cite whose thought this is.
Yeah.
I don't know what was my thoughts, and they all are integrated into me, right? It's like the time of sitting with them and learning from them and expanding my way of thinking about things. So I would say the combination of my desire to keep changing and growing and adapting, and the opportunity to have people come in my life that was stimulating, innovating, and help and resonated with what I was trying to accomplish. So I felt like I was always moving forward. The term I use is failing forward. Like, how do I fail forward, right? If this didn't work, what did we learn and how do we do it? And kind of looking at that. And I really, over the years, talk about love. I really love my clients. Mm-hmm. They taught me so much. They survived such hardships and challenges. And really, the honor it was to kind of be with them made me, when I was done with a session or feel like, wow, that really was an honor.
Yeah.
That was a spiritual experience being with you, and wow, that's amazing. So I think I always had that approach to my work. That allowed me to like, wow, it's like I could get to do this tomorrow.
Exactly. Yeah. The other thing that I wonder, especially like hearing you talk, is that he kind of finishes up the chapter about, I almost see it more as identity than meaning of life, though obviously there's so much overlap between those two things that there's no real reason to argue about the difference of them. But, when we put the trauma-informed lens on this, and I think about the folks that we work with that are often have had to survive and had to just get by and hadn't had a whole lot of opportunity to sit and think about some of the bigger issues that he has in this book. And he talks about how a lot of times, again, whether you want to call it identity or meaning of life, those semantics I don't think really matter. But he talks about how through religion, culture, country, I would say ethnicity potentially in there, is we have these pieces of who we are and our experience that helps sort of guide that creation of that meaning and that purpose that we wake up to try to fulfill each and every day. And I just think this chapter, I mean, in many ways, this whole book, but I think really this chapter also just makes me sad because of all the experiences I've had where I've got to sit back, probably too many for my mental health, and reflect about what is the meaning of life? What philosophy, how do I integrate existentialism or quantum physics into my perception of the universe itself? I mean, those are thoughts that you have when you've got food in the refrigerator and your mortgage is paid pretty well up. And so I just kind of wonder because, in some ways, having a meaning, having a defined purpose, I think is so important to living a healthy life. And yet through, as we've talked about, destruction of kind of a personal narrative that's pretty dark about self, world, relationships, and just the constant survival, our folks often don't get a chance in some ways to ask those questions. And so I just kind of wonder, how do these bigger issues come into play, if they ever do at all, in sort of your work? Because I think they're important, but they almost seem, boy, I need to help you get food for this evening or a shelter bed for tonight. And we're so immediate focused that, a lot of times we'll end the relationship without ever having these larger conversations. And I just kind of wondered how this meaning of life identity all kind of comes together clinically for you.
Well, for me, the issue really is trying to understand people's systems of meaning, right? So this experience that they're having, they're bringing their system of meaning to it, right? And they don't know that they're bringing a system of meaning. They think that's just reality.
Yeah.
Right? So two people could be in the same room, and this person, just loses something, and this person just loses something. And this person says, I'm so sad I lost something, but I'm sure something else is going to show up in my life. Yeah. This person is, the world's going to come to an end. Nothing, I lose everything. Nothing is there, right? The same event, but there's a meaning that gets brought to that piece, right? And so I think that in order to survive, we always want to somehow anticipate what's happening. So we bring expectations and meaning to this that is based on past experiences to kind of look at that. Right. So my clinical work, I'm really trying to really better understand how this person is making sense of their experience, right? To kind of do it. And by me being open and curious and empathetic and to do it, is they're having a different experience in the moment that begins to create some change for them, to kind of looking at them, right? So system of meaning is an important piece for me in my work, to kind of looking at that piece. And it's driving people's behavior. It's driving people's emotional reactions to kind of look at that. And then they tell a story. But the other thing I think that is important is this belief that somehow because you're well off and you have food in your refrigerator, you could be philosophical. I got to tell you is that in my life, growing up in New York and being on subways, some of the most philosophical people were these people that lived on the street. Yeah. And they didn't have all the other distractions of getting up to go to work. They were deep into philosophy, man, and the meaning of life. So sometimes if we believe that, we miss being open to what this person who looks like they got nothing, they got an important lesson to learn, man. Yeah. They're just in disguise, right? They're like Merlin the wizard, right? It's like, I didn't realize I was going to meet you today. It was like, you look like you're this person that has nothing, and wow, you've got a lot to teach.
Absolutely.
So I really have learned over the years is don't let persons, just the way they look, block you from learning something very special from the experience that this person has to offer you.
Wonderful point. And, I think being a very bad existential therapist early on in my career, I just remember like sitting in group sessions. I'll use group very loosely with kids initially in juvenile justice and then child welfare, asking them some of these big questions as just a fan of philosophy. I wouldn't call myself necessarily a student of philosophy, but a fan of a fanboy of philosophy. And it was interesting because I thought, in some ways, they especially younger, the adolescents I was working with had not kind of sat back and kind of been asked these questions before. And I think that it was a fascinating thing. And I would have done it totally different with everything I know now of building up to some of these big questions. But I also thought that it was fascinating to watch them. I think my best groups, and those weren't even really all that good, but the best groups that I ran sometimes were these bigger questions of getting them to think kind of outside their day-to-day. And I think you're absolutely right. Sometimes they had decisions that still inform my thinking, or they had insights that still inform my thinking of the world. But it's like sometimes I think we're so busy trying to get the referral done or this, that, or the other is, that there is some power in some of these big questions and listening to people's answer and getting their wisdom as well.
Right. I think getting them, you can't just ask a question as a question. You got to create a scenario for them to even understand what you're talking about, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, I remember with the kids, I would try to ask them what they valued. And it's like, well, I don't have any values. I don't really believe in that stuff. To kind of look at that, right? And then I would talk to them and I say, so what do you value about relationships? And it's like, well, I don't care. People leave you. I don't really value that. So, I'd say to them, okay, so, let's take a scenario. Your girlfriend's across town and she needs to get to you. And she gets in the car and the guy says to her, I'll take you across town if you give me a blowjob. And so she does and gets over here and says, I love you so much. What's your reaction? And they'd go, I'd kill her. I said, so you have values, man, right? It's like, what were you valuing? She goes, she was disloyal. So loyalty is a value of yours, right? Let's talk about it. But it's like, if you ask them, the question doesn't go in the right way. So, for these kids, loyalty, for these kids, feeling in some ways respected, and to kind of look at these values were very, very deep, but they didn't call them values.
Right.
And so sometimes when we have discussions from our psychology book or existential, it's like they don't have a clue what you're talking about, but when you listen to them, you begin to realize, wow, I wonder where you got this concept of being so loyal to your family.
Yeah.
Right? That where did this come from? It's like, well, in my family, if you speak outside the family, you were basically a betrayal. You would get kicked out. It's like, oh. So I would bet even coming here talking to me is a challenge.
Yeah.
Yeah, right? It's like now we're talking. So I would say is this issue of being open and curious about what is their existential experience in their world.
Right.
Right? Their world is getting kicked out of my family and get kicked out of and being labeled a snitch is a major existential experience, man.
Right.
Right? So you've gone through that. And now I can relate. It's like, oh, I get it. I remember, when I was a teenager and I was part of a group that somehow if I really told them I cried at chick flicks, I got kicked out of the group, man.
Good to know that about you, Jerry. Good to know.
I'm just saying, right? It's like, now I have something to relate to them.
Right. Yeah, and I think that's and his point, I think you bring that to life in a very practical way of how we look at life, the world, ourselves, our values, that sort of, and if that all comes together in something like the meaning of life for us, looking at, and I think he does do a pretty good job of building this up throughout the book, but looking at what do we get from our religion? Are there lessons that if we grew up in a religious tradition that we carry with us? What strength of our culture do we take with us? Well, what about do we get, and he says this is hard for diverse countries like the United States, but what's it mean to be an American for you? What positive or negative pieces. What's it mean to be from Colorado? What's that? Do you carry pride with that statement? And, it's kind of like those little blocks of, okay, lessons that we've learned along the way. And obviously they come together in unique ways within individuals. But, that's where I think that as I grew up professionally, at least in academia, at a time where psychology was really into multiculturalism, because a lot of the sins probably of the past, I would imagine. I think bringing out strength of culture and experience, it was really central to my education. And I think that's one thing I've carried with me through that is, how do we get people, and sometimes that may just be exposing them to aspects of their culture that may be more positive sometimes than what they may see every day in their neighborhood, and to help find those sort of role models to help them sort of be inspired by as well. And I think, I like to think of those as building blocks. And then again, all those express themselves in unique ways within the individual. But I think helping somebody really connect to where they come from, maybe addressing some of the negatives of that as well, therapeutically for some might be beneficial, but also really pulling, like you said, loyalty as a positive character trait or value that someone has. I think the more we think about those and how we manifest those in our life, again, we're more resilient when we have that moral compass leading forward.
This concept of integration,
yeah,
right, is we want to disown the bad and own the good, but really life is about ups and downs, ins and outs, and that you have to be able to be present with the bad as well as the good. And I think that the work that we do when we're dealing with people who've had hardships, people who've had to overcome adversity, people who have been betrayed, people have been violated in some ways just because of their gender, just because of their age, just because of their skin color. To sit with them and be with them in all those things means that you have to realize that there's, as he said, life is about yin and yang, not about yang or yin, but yin and yang.
Yeah.
Right? And I think the religions have been much better at teaching us those things about life in different ways, in different forms. And I should say spirituality, to kind of looking at that piece. So, to me, science is really, really good. It's really the religion of the day. Yeah. To kind of do it. We're trying to make sense. We're trying to put numbers and statistics and everything to something that's happening. And so how do I bring that experience? But I do think that is a developmental process. Yeah. That in a way, in your work, you talk about the hero's journey. You've got to get rid of that and go out in the world and experience some of those challenges before you come back and integrate all this stuff. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of natural sometimes to reject some of those traditional things when you're an adolescent and kind of moving out, or search for some alternative. And as you get older, you begin to integrate the stuff in a different kind of way. Yeah. When you get past all the battling. Yeah. To kind of looking at that, as he talked about in his book, for him. Although his description of politics isn't necessarily what I see going on today. Right? Your traditional low, people are liberal and they want social justice, and people are conservative. They want rituals, and that's not necessarily what you see today. But to be able to integrate both those perspectives is an important part of growing up.
Absolutely. So at the end of our big idea series, let me ask you the biggest question I ever asked you, Jerry. What is the meaning of life?
One thing, one.
We got a few minutes. I don't want to rush your answer here. That's why I'm giving you a few at the end of this journey we've taken together.
The meaning of life. I think the meaning of life is that you find a way to find pleasure in living and not be afraid of dying. Whatever that is, that's the meaning of life, is that we have a brain that is aware that we're going to die. Mm-hmm. And we could spend our whole life worrying about dying, or we could spend time worrying about living. And the meaning of life is, how do you find that balance between living and dying? Great. And I think trauma makes that really, really difficult.
Yeah.
Trauma creates this fear because I was psychologically there was nobody there for me. I was alone. I was overwhelmed. Is that this issue of survival becomes so prevalent that I'm not open to living and being open to the present moment experiences. And so how do I help this individual move from a survival state to an open and curious state? Yeah. To kind of look at that piece. So I have found for me is being open and curious has been the purpose of my life, and to kind of looking at that. So that would be my one thing that I would say is we're all going to die anyway, so you might as well have a good ride along the
way. Enjoy the ride along the way. I love it. Oh, goodness. Well, I mean, I think we've explored this book inside and out at this point. So we appreciate everybody taking this 10-week journey with us through these big ideas. And
what's your answer to that question?
Oh, I thought I was going 42. There you go. I love that. I would say, I think it relates to yours. I would say love is the meaning of life that I find. It's how do you not live in a constant state of bliss. That always seems boring to me, that constant state of euphoria or whatever. But how do you bring love into what you do each and every day? And being realistic about that you're probably, for most of us, not going to live in nirvana for the majority of any day, much less hour. But how do you bring as much love to your work? How do you bring as much love into the world? How do you love your life and love others? And I think as long as I stay grounded in that, my life seems to have a lot more purpose to it. So and trying to bring, again, realize that in everything I do is an ongoing challenge, but one that keeps me grounded, and I think what's important. So, and 42. I love that answer. For all the nerds out there. Awesome. Well, now that we've got the meaning of life, we're going to take a couple weeks off. We're going to do East Coast because I think this is the time of year, Jerry, that everybody goes to the Hamptons or whatever you all New Yorkers do. So dog days of summer, we're going to take a week or so off, sort of regroup, try to get Kurt back in the loop for maybe a couple episodes and see where we go from there. So thanks for joining us this summer on this series. And again, if you don't see us hear from us next week, you'll hear from us in a few. So as always, you can find show notes, discussion questions, and a whole lot more at traumainformedlens.org. And we'll see you soon for episode 96. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks a lot. Enjoy the rest of your summer.